So first we'll start by removing the little rubber piece from the lid, and then you're just going to screw your cup jack directly into your cup, and then we're going to base coat this. I chose the mint color from Pop of Color, but you can really use any base color you'd like for this glitter. You could even just do epoxy directly onto the stainless steel. So I'm using my paint to apply my glitter, and I'm just brushing it on in a nice thick coat and not worrying about the brush strokes here because we're just going to apply our glitter directly onto the wet paint. If you're doing the epoxy method, then you just would want to add a small amount of your epoxy and then dump your glitter directly onto it, and then we're going to let that dry. Because I'm using the paint for my adhesive to apply my glitter, we're just going to let that dry for about 20 minutes and then we're ready for epoxy. So while that's drying, we're going to start working on our topper. So for this, obviously we don't need a base topper. We're just going to make our design directly around the actual lid. So for this, I'm just taping off the edges because I don't want any of my culture sculpt to get on the threads of this. So now we're just going to mix up equal parts of our culture sculpt, and to do this I just usually grab a handful of each, and that's a pretty good measurement enough for me, but you can definitely form it into a ball and see, but because I've done so many of these now, I just usually can guesstimate how much I'm going to need. So you just want to make sure that you're mixing it together really well. There should not be different splotches of color, it should all be the same. Once that's mixed, we're now going to mix a small amount of the Lush Jungle dispersion color directly into that, and then you're going to do the same thing and mix this really well so it's all one color and you don't have any streaks. Once you've got it all mixed up, we're just going to take a section of the culture sculpt and we're just going to form it directly onto the lid. You just want to make sure that your edges, you're smoothing those down. You don't have any overhang, and that you're trying to form it as much to the lid as you can, and you can kind of just press around until it's even. So just make sure you're smoothing down, pressing down all of those edges and the sides, and then just make sure you can try and get it as even as you can, and that also you don't have any overhang where the straw hole is. Next, I am using this little clay tool thing that I don't know the official name of it, but it's got like a pointy triangle edge to it, and it is wooden, so it does work really well to give me those deep lines that I'm going for here. And I'm just going around, I'm not spacing it evenly because hey, no cactus is, so I'm just going and I'm giving the indents to each line. And then now for this part, so you can do this a multitude of different ways. For me, what I found best to kind of give it that actual cactus look is I'm using these little glass beads from Peachy Olive, and I'm placing them just from large to small, and then I add a few small extra stones in there just to kind of make it more random. You could totally use any kind of rhinestone, or you could actually just make the indentations instead of actually filling them with something, and that would look just as good as well. So just kind of play around with it and see what idea you think would work best. So we're just going to let that dry for about 4 hours, and then I also added a cute little flower to this when it was still wet as well. You could totally hand sculpt this. I don't have that skill, so I used this flower from our previous tutorial that fit perfect. So now back to our cup, we're going to add our first layer of epoxy. I mixed up 15 milliliters each part A and B epoxy, and then I'm just applying that over the entire tumbler, and then we're going to let that cure. Now for the next step, you do want your cup to be totally smooth, so you may need to go back in and apply an additional layer of epoxy over that tumbler. So now that my tumbler is cured and completely smooth and not sanded, I am going to apply my little cactuses that I cut out, and I'll have the link for the design that I used in the description below. And I cut these at about 5 inches for the larger cactuses, and then I'm just applying them from the bottom about 3/4 of the way up. Now I am using 631, which is just the removable vinyl, since we're doing a peekaboo method, just because it's a little easier and it doesn't tend to leave any residue when we lift that vinyl up. Now for this step here, so a lot of people do the peekaboo method with spray paint, and you can most definitely still do this part with spray paint. You don't have to use paint, that's totally fine. However, we're going to be covering up this white paint anyway with our alcohol inks, so really the streaks didn't matter. So I'm just brushing a somewhat thinner coat of my pop-up color white paint, and then I'm just applying it over the entire cup, including the bottom. And then I only did one coat because, like I said, you can still see through it, but we're covering that up anyway, so the streaks really didn't matter if it wasn't fully covered. So I just let that dry for about 15 minutes, and then we're ready for our inks. You can also definitely use a heat gun to speed that up even quicker if you wanted, and just kind of dry that paint a little bit quicker. Just make sure that if you do that, you are using a thinner coat of paint or your paint will crack. So for our inks, I'm just using these little makeup sponges that I cut up in pieces, and we're just going to apply a couple of drops to the sponge, and then we're just going to kind of dab the ink onto the tumbler just in random sections. Now, because I'm using the shimmer, it is kind of hard to see the true color of it in the video, but I did go over it about 2 to 3 times, depending on the vibrancy that you're looking for, just to make it a little bit more vibrant and to have that color show through. So to blend everything together, what I did once I had all of my tumbler covered with the different splotches of inks, I didn't want those harsh lines there, so I took the shimmer mint color and I kind of went around the outer edges of the different colors and just kind of blended everything together till it looked how I wanted. So once you have your cup fully covered, now we're going to peel back our vinyl. So I'm just using one of these little needle dentist tools, and I'm just going to pull my vinyl carefully off so I don't scratch my inks. Now, if you have a little leftover paint, because it's just the chalk paint, it's super easy to remove. So just peel all of your vinyl pieces off, make sure that you don't scratch the inks, and then what we'll do is we'll come back in with like a finer brush. I think I used an eyelash brush, and just kind of went over the lines and cleaned up any of that extra paint that I didn't want showing. The important part here is you definitely want to let your inks dry fully before you epoxy, otherwise they will smear. So I tend to let my inks dry for about 24 hours and I do not seal them. I don't like the clear coat sealers for my inks because I feel like it dulls the color of them. That's just me. You totally could seal your inks with a clear coat spray, and that would speed up the process of having not to let it sit so long before the epoxy. So you could totally be done with the cup at that point. However, I wanted mine to be just a little extra, so I went back in with this pretty orange opal fire looking vinyl that I got from AliExpress, I believe it was. And I did cut my design with an outline. However, I'm removing the actual full shape, but don't throw that away if you're doing this method. I'll link the tutorial that I followed to get this outline. I'm using Silhouette, so keep the actual vinyl design, don't throw it away. You can put it back on the paper, as you'll see here in a second in the video. That way you're not wasting your vinyl. And then I'm just going to line up my outline, just eyeball it, and then apply that to the cup, and then lift my transfer tape. So I outlined all of my cactuses, and then I also just added a quick little decal just to kind of finish off the cup. Now, because I'm using the opal vinyl, it does tend to repel epoxy and give me those little fish eyes, so Quick Coat has been a lifesaver. So I'm applying it, just a thin coat, over the entire cup, so that way when we apply our epoxy, we don't get any of those fish eyes. You want to make sure that you let your Quick Coat dry for at least an hour before we add our final layer of epoxy. To finish our topper, I did not get a chance to put this in the video, but you definitely would want to add a layer of epoxy just to kind of seal everything up. And that's it. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed, and I can't wait to see what you create.